She was declared dead, etched in stone on a memorial wall. But 7 years later, Commander Kaelin Reyes returned from the shadows, flying the very jet they said had been buried with her. What followed wasn't a resurrection, it was a reckoning. Welcome to my channel. They say planes don't have souls, but I swear, when the engines of my old fighter roared to life that night, the air itself remembered. It started just before midnight, beneath a low moon above Red Rock Air Base, tucked deep in the Nevada desert. That's when the first whispers crackled across the control tower's comms. Control, we've got unauthorized movement on runway 4. The air traffic controller, a kid named Weller, still green behind the ears, tried to keep his voice level. Say again. There was a pause. Then, it's the old Mark V. Serial 110A, the one that belonged to Commander Kaelin Reyes. Static hummed in the silence that followed. That's not possible, Weller's supervisor snapped, practically grabbing the headset from his hands. Reyes is on the memorial wall. She's been dead 7 years. But the silver aircraft kept moving, slow and steady, as if shrugging off time. She slipped out of the shadows of Hangar 6, a hangar nobody had touched in years. One no one was allowed to enter. Inside, I tightened my grip on the stick. The Mark V's controls felt familiar under my fingers, almost like they'd been waiting. I kept my breathing even, eyes forward, every motion deliberate. I knew what they were thinking out there. That someone was pulling a prank. That maybe a maintenance tech had gotten drunk and decided to joyride a Legends plane. But legends don't get borrowed. They get remembered. Or, in my case, resurrected. 7 years ago, I was listed Kia, killed in action, during Operation Cracked Halo. My name, Commander Kaelin Reyes, Phantom Squadron, call sign Torchlight. Back then, I flew missions no one dared to write down, over borders no one admitted existed. The world thought I died behind enemy lines in that Mark V. The crash was staged, burned wreckage and all. The cover story was airtight. I vanished into the shadows under orders from an agency so high up it didn't even have a name. I disappeared to stop something bigger than anyone could have imagined. And now, after 7 silent years, I was back. Not for glory, not for revenge. For closure. Down on the tarmac, Sergeant Hank Lott was among the crowd gathered for the annual Fallen Flyers ceremony. I remember Hank. He was my crew chief, gruff, brilliant with a torque wrench, and never called me anything but ma'am, unless I was bleeding. When I vanished, part of him went with me. He used to say my jet purred different, that he could feel the difference when it was me in the cockpit. That night, as I rolled the Mark V onto the taxiway, he stood facing the memorial wall, fingers brushing over my name etched into the black granite. He probably thought he was losing his mind when he heard the engines. I can't imagine what it did to him when he turned and saw my bird gleaming under the runway lights, alive and angry as ever. People started shouting. "This is a disgrace," someone yelled from the ceremony crowd. "That jet's sacred." A general's voice echoed over the base speakers. "All units, form a barrier at runway 4. That aircraft will not take off." But I didn't slow down. The base tower called out again, this time more urgent. "Unidentified pilot, this is Red Rock Control. Kill your engine immediately. You are in violation of base protocol. Repeat, power down, or you will be intercepted." I stayed silent. The voice in my ears was barely a murmur now. "We're being mocked," someone growled. "Flying Reyes's jet like a stunt show." "No one's been inside that cockpit in 7 years," shouted another. They were wrong. Of course. I had. I eased the throttle forward, every rivet in the frame humming with purpose. The Mark V wasn't a machine. She was a companion. She didn't ask why, we just flew. From the tower, I could see the floodlights glinting off a line of Humvees now, blocking the runway's edge. Armed guards stepped out, weapons drawn. Still, I didn't flinch. Back inside the control room, Airman Weller stared at the radar screen. The transponder had lit up like a Christmas tree. Sir," he stammered. "You need to see this." His supervisor leaned over. And there it was. Call sign, PH06. Status, active. That was mine. "Rerun the ID," barked the supervisor. "That can't be right. She's dead." "I've run it 3 times, Weller whispered. Back on the tarmac, Sergeant Lott took a step forward, staring at the jet, the one he had fueled and loved like a child. He dropped to his knees. "God help me," he said, tears streaking his windburned cheeks. "Kaelin, is that really you?" Inside the cockpit, I could feel every word crackling through the base comms. Every command, every threat, every disbelief. I didn't answer them. Not yet. But I would. God help me, I would. From the air, the blockade looked like a dam holding back a river. Humvees crisscrossed the tarmac, headlights blazing like searchlights from some old war movie. A wall of soldiers stood behind them, rifles angled, ready but uncertain. I recognized their stance. They were trained to act, but none of them had been briefed on what to do if a ghost came back flying. I lowered my altitude just enough to let them know I saw them. Then I pulled the throttle gently, settling the Mark 5 into a slow taxi turn, aligning her nose with the main runway. Runway 4, my old launching ground. I knew every crack in that stretch of asphalt, every bump that shook the landing gear on takeoff. A voice came over the tower again, older this time, firm, a man used to being obeyed. "This is Brigadier General Curtis Rayner, pilot of Aircraft 110A. You are surrounded. You will cut power now and exit your vehicle." A pause. I repeat, cut power now or you will be met with force. But the tower radar had already betrayed them. I was no bogey. The transponder kept flashing, irrefutable. PH-06. Active. Commander Kaelin Reyes. Someone in that room was panicking. I imagined Weller again, his fingers twitching above the keyboard, unsure whether to call this divine intervention or a security breach. Out the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A tall figure broke through the line of troops. No helmet, no armor. Just a weathered man with a crooked back and a mechanic's walk. Sergeant Hank Lott. He didn't raise a weapon, didn't even flinch. Just stood there, like a stone in a storm, staring up at me with something between heartbreak and awe. I could almost hear his voice in my head. "She ain't dead. No way she's dead. Not if that bird's flying again." The memory hit me hard. Lott used to say that Jet didn't like anybody but me. She'd stall on other pilots. Random glitches. One time, even refused to power up until I sat in her seat. That was the moment I decided it was time. I keyed the comm, my voice low and steady. "Red Rock Control. This is Phantom 06. Commander Kaelin Reyes, requesting clearance." Static. And then chaos. What did she just? No, that's impossible. "Sir, confirmation just came through from Central Registry. Active status. Clearance level, red." The general's voice cut through again, sharper this time. "Pilot, if this is some kind of deception, you better come clean now." "No deception, sir," I said. "Only truth. The kind that doesn't fit in your files." A long pause followed. Then, finally, "Lower your canopy. Step out of the aircraft." I exhaled slowly. Then I did something I hadn't done in 7 years. I popped the cockpit. The hiss of hydraulics echoed across the base like a gasp. Every head turned. Soldiers raised their rifles instinctively, but no one fired. No one moved. I climbed out onto the wing, the night air cool against my flight suit. My boots found the familiar metal ridge as I stood tall, helmet in hand. The world fell completely silent. A voice broke through the stillness. From Lott. "My God," he whispered, barely audible. "You came home." That broke me a little. Just for a moment. I'd spent so long in the dark, so many years behind mirrored glass and nameless rooms, that I'd forgotten what light felt like. General Rayner pushed forward through the blockade, followed by officers in dress uniforms and a scattering of stunned MPs. He stopped a few feet from the jet and looked up at me. His face, usually carved from granite, had turned ashen. "Commander Reyes," he said, "we buried you." "With all due respect, sir," I replied, "you buried a name, not a person." I could feel the ripple in the crowd. A reverent hush as officers who had once stood at my ceremony now realized they'd mourned a ghost. I stepped down from the wing, landing lightly on the tarmac. My legs wobbled for a split second, not from age, but from memory. 7 years is a long time to be untouchable. Rayner finally found his voice again. "Where have you been?" "That's a long story," I said, brushing a fleck of dust from my sleeve. "But it ends here. I had to finish something before I could come home." He looked at me like he wasn't sure whether to salute or arrest me. From behind him, a new figure approached, a woman in her early 30s, brown uniform, big eyes full of disbelief. Lieutenant Amy Stone. I didn't know her personally, but I recognized the patch on her arm. Phantom Squadron. My old unit. She stared at me like I was a museum exhibit come to life. "You were my first lesson in flight school," she said softly. "The one pilot they said did the impossible." I smiled faintly. Guess I didn't do a good enough job if they still think it's impossible. Lot finally walked up, stopping just short of embracing me. "I kept her warm," he said, nodding toward the Mark 5. "Every month. Diagnostics. Fuel cycles. Just in case." "You always did have faith," I said. "No, ma'am," he said, his eyes glassy. I had certainty. For the first time in a long time, I felt like Kaelin again. Not an agent. Not a ghost. Just a pilot with dirt on her boots and the wind behind her. But the questions were just beginning. And the answers? They would change everything. They moved me into the operations wing like I was radioactive. 2 armed guards flanked me, but they didn't look tense, just confused. You could see it in their eyes. Half of them were treating me like a security threat. The other half, like I'd risen from the dead. The conference room hadn't changed. Same soulless gray walls, same buzzing overhead lights, same ugly clock ticking a second too slow. I'd spent enough time in rooms like this back when my orders came sealed and stapled, top secret tags slapped on like scarlet letters. General Rayner sat across from me, still in his dress greens. His face was tight, jaw clenched, wrinkles deeper than I remembered. He was flanked by 2 unfamiliar analysts in suits. Not military, agency types. I knew the breed. Silent. Watching. Writing mental dossiers with every breath I took. Rayner cleared his throat. "Commander Reyes, before we proceed, I need to remind you this room is under direct surveillance. Everything you say is being recorded." "Good," I said, leaning back in the chair. About time someone heard the truth. He didn't blink. "We thought you were dead." "That was the point." "Explain." So I did. 7 years ago, I began. During Operation Cracked Halo, I uncovered a breach in our command structure. Someone high up, too high, was leaking live intel to foreign assets. Not just chatter. Coordinates. Strike plans. Team movements. One of the agency men shifted in his seat. First movement he'd made since I walked in. I reported it up the chain. I continued. The wrong person heard me. I was ordered into a routine patrol. What I got instead was an ambush. Rayner narrowed his eyes. "We recovered wreckage." "Staged," I said. "Burned out decoy. Courtesy of some folks in a joint NCCIA compartment you won't find in any briefing folder." The suits were really paying attention now. They pulled me out. Faked the crash. Gave me a new ID, a new face, almost. You can't exactly scrub a pilot from the sky, so they made me a shadow. My mission was to dismantle the network from the inside. Quietly. No headlines. No parades. Rayner was pale now. "Why didn't you tell us? You could have trusted command." I looked him in the eye. The leak came from command. He didn't argue. He just rubbed his temples like the headache of the century had just taken root. One of the suits finally spoke. "You're telling us that for 7 years, you ran unsanctioned operations inside U.S. intelligence infrastructure?" "Not unsanctioned," I replied. "Just undocumented." He tapped a pen against the table. "Any oversight?" 3 people. All above your pay grade." Rayner was still stuck somewhere between rage and disbelief. "So why now? Why come back? Why risk exposure?" "Because it's over," I said quietly. "The breach is closed. Every asset neutralized. Every double-blind contact burned. There's nothing left to chase." And I hesitated. Because I watched good people grieve a lie. It's one thing to disappear. It's another to let them mourn a ghost. A long silence followed. Then the second suit spoke. "Your return creates complications. Protocol violations. Breach of classified containment." I stood. "Call it what you want. But I didn't come back to be contained. I came back to tell the truth. If that's a complication, you're welcome." The suits exchanged a look. Rayner didn't say anything at all. I turned to the door. "I'm done here. If you want more answers, send someone with a spine." Back in the hallway, the lights felt too bright. The air too stale. But at the end of the corridor, waiting like a faithful hound, was Lot. He held something in his hands. A plaque. Brushed aluminum with laser-etched letters. My name. My call sign. Phantom 06. Beneath it, service beyond recognition. I took it with both hands, the weight of it more than metal. "They're talking about pulling your name from the wall," he said. "Saying you're not technically fallen." I looked him square in the face. "Let them leave it. Not as a fallen pilot. but as a reminder that some missions demand silence. Some warriors fight in shadow. He nodded slowly, his jaw tight with emotion. You always were a stubborn one. Still am. As we stepped out into the sunlight, something extraordinary happened. The younger pilots, men and women barely out of flight school, stood in a loose formation along the flight line. They weren't in uniform. No one had ordered them. They were just there, watching. A lieutenant I didn't know, maybe 25, blonde, nervous, stepped forward. Commander Reyes, she said, voice trembling. Is it true? You flew Phantom 06 into Omega airspace solo? Took down 3 satellites with analog targeting? I smiled. Kid, I did worse things than that with nothing but a map and instinct. The group broke into quiet awe. Some smiled. Some whispered. One saluted. I didn't stop them. For the first time in 7 years, I let the truth breathe. That night, Red Rock didn't sleep. Word had spread beyond the base before sunset. It started with whispers, then texts, then full-blown social media leaks. Phantom 06 sighted. Kaelin Reyes is alive. The ghost pilot returns. The story fractured into rumors, some claiming I was a clone, others swearing I'd been in cryosleep. A few even floated the idea I'd never existed at all, that I was a military myth designed to scare foreign air forces into submission. But inside the base, they knew better. They had seen the jet. They had heard my voice. By midnight, I found myself standing in front of the memorial wall again, bathed in soft orange runway light. My name was still there, etched in stone beside 34 others from the Phantom Wing. I ran my fingers over it. The letters felt colder than the desert air. Kind of weird, I murmured to no one. Reading your own eulogy carved in granite. You earned that name on the wall, a voice said behind me. I turned. It was Raynor. No suit this time. Just a battered flight jacket and an expression that looked 2 decades older than it had yesterday. You didn't deserve to be buried in silence, he continued. But maybe we weren't ready to hear your story. I nodded slowly. Most aren't. He stood beside me in silence for a while. Then, there's talk about stripping your service record, retconning your medals. Too many questions about those black ops. Let him talk, I said. But the people who matter? They know. He sighed. Damn right we do. Later, I walked alone across the flight line, past hangars that had once been my second home. Everything looked familiar and strange at once, like someone had rearranged the furniture in a house I grew up in. I found Lot in the maintenance bay, surrounded by open panels and grease-stained toolboxes. The Mark 5 sat behind him, stripped down and shining. He was working on the landing gear, humming some ancient rock ballad out of tune. You're still at it? I asked. He looked up and gave me that crooked grin of his. She's seen more action than half the birds on this base, he said. She deserves a little love. She deserves a damn museum, I said. He wiped his hands on a rag. That jet flew into a dead zone and came back. That alone makes her more than metal. I ran my hand along the wing. She flew steady, even after 7 years. She was waiting for you, he said, like the rest of us. I sat on an old ammo crate, suddenly more tired than I'd felt in years. Lot, what happens now? He leaned against the Mark 5. You mean besides generals losing sleep and rookies Googling your name? I chuckled. I mean here. Me. On base. I don't exactly fit in anymore. You're wrong, he said. You fit better now than you ever did. There was a knock on the hangar doorframe. Lieutenant Amy Stone stepped inside, her face flushed like she'd run the whole way. Commander Reyes, she said breathlessly. The cadets, they're asking if you'd speak with them. Not in a class. Just talk. I raised an eyebrow. Why? She shifted awkwardly. Because they've read textbooks on strategy. They've studied dogfights on simulators. But no one ever told them what silence looks like, or what it means to give everything and disappear. I stood and stretched, my knees cracking from years of abuse. All right, let's give them something to remember. We walked to the training hangar, where 24 young pilots in training had gathered, still in their PT gear, eyes wide, notebooks in hand like I was going to hand them a secret playbook. I didn't. Instead, I told them a story. Not of battle, not of kills or medals, but of waiting, of loneliness, of doing the right thing when no one would ever know you did. The truth is, I said, you don't always get thanked for what matters most. Sometimes your reward is knowing someone else made it home because of what you did. They listened like I was carving words into stone. One kid, barely 20, raised his hand. Ma'am, is it true you flew a solo recon into the dagger zone and disabled a targeting array manually? I grinned. Let's just say, I didn't wait for a green light. They laughed, but it wasn't mockery. It was all. When the session ended, Stone pulled me aside. That thing you said, about disappearing to protect people, that's gonna stick with them. Maybe forever. I nodded. Then I've done my job. That night, before I turned in, I made one last stop. The old chapel. They still had my photo there, framed on the remembrance shelf. I picked it up, stared at the younger version of myself in that black and white portrait. I looked so serious, so determined, so known. I tucked it under my arm. That girl's done enough. The next morning, I found an official envelope slipped under my door. Heavy paper, embossed seal, a little too ceremonial for Red Rock protocol. Inside, a direct summons from Central Command HQ. Effective immediately, Commander Kaelin Reyes is to report to General Command for a classified personnel reassignment. There was no sender name, just a coded signature I hadn't seen in years. But I knew it well. They weren't done with me. By noon, I was in a briefing room at HQ, standing across from General Rayner again. Only this time, he wasn't alone. A panel of 5 senior officials sat behind a polished table, each one wearing expressions carved from stone. We've reviewed your operations, Rayner began. What little we're allowed to access. We've also received confirmations. That must have made for interesting reading, I said. A gray-haired woman in a navy blazer leaned forward. Commander, we'll be direct. You've operated beyond the lines of protocol, even law. But you did so with results no other unit could have delivered. 14 foreign agents exposed, Rayner added. 3 rogue generals removed. Multiple terrorist cells neutralized without civilian loss. You saved lives, but you also rewrote the rules. I didn't rewrite anything, I replied. I just followed the mission where it went. Even when the paperwork got scared. They looked at one another, silently weighing something unspoken. Finally, the woman in the blazer slid a folder toward me. Commander Reyes, we're offering you a new post. One that draws on everything you've learned. Everything you've survived. I opened it. Senior Tactical Advisor, Special Warfare Division. I blinked. You want me to consult? Not just consult, she said. Mentor. Lead. We want you to shape how we prepare the next generation. Not with theory, with truth. I looked around the room. So after 7 years off the grid, you want me back in the open. In front of cadets. With a name again. Rayner nodded. They need someone who knows the cost of silence. And how to serve without needing applause. I exhaled, the weight of it settling in. I'll do it. But on one condition. Name it. I keep my name on the wall. They exchanged confused glances. You're alive, one of them said. We can't list a living officer among the fallen. You can't, I said. Because I died in a different way. That name on the granite? It's a reminder that some of us serve where there are no medals. No salutes. I want cadets to see it and ask why. Then I'll give them the answer. Rayner studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Granted, that was the moment everything shifted. When I stepped back onto the tarmac that afternoon, the sun high and hot on the concrete, I wasn't just a returning ghost. I was something else now. A bridge between the world that trained me and the one that had forgotten what it meant to truly guard the mission. They converted an old mission control building into my new domain. Repainted, reinforced, rewired. It was modest, just a couple of offices, a briefing room, and a training simulator. But it had one thing that made all the difference. A view of the runway. Lott showed up that evening, toolbox in hand. You're really doing it, huh? He said, nodding toward the new sign stenciled on the door. Tactical Operations and Resilience Center, Commander K. Reyes. I am, I said, unlocking the door. They finally gave me a space to do things my way. He walked inside and gave the place a quick once-over. Gonna teach them to fly? Not just fly, I said. I'm going to teach them how to come back. Or, if they don't, how to be remembered the right way. He set his toolbox down and pulled out a small framed photo. It was a shot of the Phantom Wing, all lined up on the tarmac in full gear, me front and center, grinning like a fool. Thought you might want this on the wall, he said. I took it gently, staring at the faces frozen in time. Some were gone now. Others had moved on. Yeah, I said, my voice catching. Right where it belongs. Later that week, I ran my first session. I stood before 25 cadets, each of them sharp, eager, and just naive enough to believe that flight was all about speed and precision. They didn't yet know that the hardest battles don't happen in the sky. They happen when the mission ends and no one's clapping. When you have to sit alone with what you did, what you gave up. I asked them one question. What do you think real service looks like? A few mumbled about courage. A couple mentioned sacrifice. One kid said honor, like he'd just copied it off a recruitment poster. I nodded slowly. Those are good words, I said. But they're just that, words. Real service? It's what you do when no one's looking. It's putting the mission ahead of yourself, even when it means letting go of everything that made you who you were. They were quiet after that. The good kind of quiet. The kind that means they were starting to understand. Outside, I spotted the mark, 5 parked beneath a tarp, a little sun-bleached but still standing proud. Lot had placed a new placard in front of her. Phantom 06, last flown by a pilot who never stopped flying. I walked out and placed my hand on the fuselage. I'm still not done, I whispered. It started with a knock on my door, sharp, deliberate, hesitant. The kind of knock you remember years after it fades. I was reviewing flight logs with a mug of bad coffee when I heard it. Lot was out refueling the Mark V. I figured it was another cadet with stars in their eyes and a question about old missions. But when I opened the door, I saw someone I never thought I'd face again. Eli Johnson, my old wingman. 7 years hadn't dulled the edge in his eyes. He still carried himself like a man bracing for turbulence. But there were more lines in his face now. He looked haunted. Kaelin, he said, voice barely above a whisper. I froze. He hadn't used my name like that since before the mission that erased me. I didn't think, he started, then stopped. Hell, I didn't know what to think. I stepped aside. Come in. He walked in slowly, as if the floor might give way beneath him. We sat opposite each other at the mission table, surrounded by faded maps and half-finished reports. For a long time, neither of us said a word. I blamed myself, he said finally, eyes locked on a fixed point on the wall. Every day, every night. Thought I missed something. Thought I turned the wrong way at the wrong time. You didn't, I said. I should have gone back. Circled around. Picked up the signal. There was no signal, I said gently. It was a blackout by design. I went dark on purpose. His jaw clenched. They told me your ejection failed. That the fireball was too intense to recover anything. That you were gone. I know. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I kept seeing it. That last moment. The flare of your afterburners just before the hit. It played in my head like a loop. For years. I reached out and placed my hand over his. Eli, listen to me. What happened wasn't your fault. It wasn't anyone's fault except the people I was sent to stop. He met my eyes for the first time. But you were my wingman. I still am, I said, just from a different angle. Tears welled in his eyes. Not the kind that fall. The kind that stay trapped just beneath the surface, burning. He laughed bitterly. You're the toughest person I ever flew with. And the only one who ever trusted me without needing proof. I didn't need proof, I said. I had your 6. Always. He stood abruptly and paced the room, trying to burn off the emotion. Do you have any idea what it was like? Watching them bury a closed casket? Listening to the eulogy? Knowing I was supposed to protect you? I do, I said softly. Because I watched the same thing. From 1,000 miles away. And I couldn't tell a soul I was still breathing. He stopped pacing. You watched your own funeral? Every second, I said. On a secure feed. I watched you deliver the final salute. Watched Lot place the squadron pin on the coffin. Watched my parents break. He sank into the chair like the air had left his body. So why come back? Because it's over. The mission, the network, all of it. And because I couldn't let the people I loved live in pain anymore. He exhaled hard. Then let me help. That surprised me. You want in? He nodded. Whatever this new program is, the tactical resilience thing, you need someone who's been through it. Someone who knows what it's like to lose a wingman, even if it was only for a while. I smiled for the first time that day. You're in. But we do this my way. He saluted, half joking, half serious. Commander. Just then, the door opened without a knock. Lieutenant Stone poked her head in, a tablet in hand. Commander Reyes, sorry to interrupt, but you have a call. From the Pentagon. I raised an eyebrow. Now. She nodded. They said it's sensitive. 10 minutes later, I was back in the comms room, standing in front of a secure feed. The screen flickered. Then a familiar face appeared. Deputy Director Julian Voss. One of the 3 people who had authorized my disappearance. He hadn't aged well. Or maybe I'd just changed too much. Commander Reyes, he said smoothly. Good to see you on this side of the line. Director Voss, I said. To what do I owe the surprise? He didn't smile. Word is spreading. Fast. You're making waves. Not trying to. But you are, he said. And not everyone likes it. I folded my arms. You didn't call to compliment my public relations. No, he said. I called to warn you. Some of the people you brought down had friends. Quiet ones. Wealthy ones. Not everyone's happy you're alive. Let them try, I said. This isn't a threat, he replied. It's an offer. I narrowed my eyes. An offer. We want to expand your program. Take it national. Use your framework for other branches. Navy, Marines, Intel services. Build resilience across the board. With you at the helm. I blinked. You want me to go public? Eventually. But for now, just grow it. Make it strong. We'll protect you. I laughed once, sharp, dry. I protected myself for 7 years. I don't need your net now. He smiled faintly. That's why we want you. He ended the call. I stood there a moment, letting the silence settle in. They wanted to turn my return into a symbol. But I hadn't come back to be a symbol. I'd come back to teach. To rebuild what silence had broken. They called it the Guardian Initiative. The first time I saw the draft memo, it was printed on plain paper, no logos, no seals, just a title, a mission statement, and one line in bold. Prepare warriors for the battles no one talks about. I stared at it in silence. They'd taken my story, the ghost pilot, the years in the dark, and built a doctrine around it. Quiet resilience. Mental fortitude. Shadow service. All wrapped in something the brass could pitch at conferences and recruiting seminars. Lot leaned against the doorframe while I read. They want you to lead it, he said. National rollout. Cross-branch coordination. The whole show. And let the name be public? I asked. No, not yet. Just the methods. The mindset. I ran a hand through my hair. Feels like they're branding something that shouldn't have a label. He nodded. Maybe. But maybe it's time more people knew the price of silence. That afternoon, we held our first closed-door session, just 10 cadets. Volunteers. Handpicked. Eli Johnson sat beside me at the front. He didn't speak much. Just watched. I started simple. Raise your hand if you've ever watched someone break under pressure. Every hand went up. Now keep it up if you've ever felt like you were next. Most stayed up. I let the silence do the teaching for a few seconds. Then I said, that's why we're here. To make sure no one flies alone. Not in the air, not in their head. They leaned in after that. This wasn't doctrine. It was survival. We talked about the hidden grief. About quiet guilt. About what it feels like to land after a mission and not know who you are anymore. One cadet, Callahan, lanky and sharp, asked something that stuck with me. Ma'am, how do you live with being forgotten? I didn't rush the answer. You don't, I said. You learn to let go of the need to be remembered. And instead, you protect what matters, even if no one ever knows you did. Eli looked over at me then, eyes glossy. That's when I realized. This program wasn't just for them. It was for us, too. It started as a whisper. A rumor passed from one airfield to another, picked up by a Miltech blog, then amplified by a veterans forum that specialized in conspiracy theories. The ghost pilot isn't dead. For days, we tried to ignore it. Tried to keep focus on the Guardian Initiative and the cadets who were beginning to understand what real service meant. But you can't ignore a spark when the winds are high. And this rumor? It caught fire. On a Tuesday morning, Lieutenant Stone rushed into my office, breathless. Commander, she said, slapping a tablet down in front of me. You need to see this. I stared at the screen. A grainy still image of the Mark V, my jet, taken from what looked like a drone camera. Below it, a headline in red font. Ghost jet resurfaces at Red Rock. Is Commander Reyes alive? Underneath, a blurry freeze frame from my debriefing session, clearly shot through a cracked window or a long lens. My stomach dropped. Where'd this come from? I asked. Stone's jaw was tight. No idea. But it's spreading. Fast. Some people are calling for congressional hearings. Others are saying it's AI faked. That was almost funny. Almost. By nightfall, General Rayner called an emergency meeting. No video feed this time. In person. Classified. He paced the war room like a caged animal. This leak blows everything wide open, he growled. If your existence becomes official, we're looking at years of OPSEC violations, mission rollbacks, and God knows how many international headaches. I told you this might happen, I said. You also said you were ready for it, he snapped. I am. He stopped pacing. Then I hope you meant it, because Washington's breathing down our necks. They want a fall guy. I leaned forward. Not my team. Rayner sighed. Wasn't suggesting them. Was asking if you'd consider disappearing again. That hit like a sucker punch. You're serious. I am, he said. We bury you again, this time deeper. Let the program live without the myth attached. I stared at him for a long moment. Then I stood, slow and steady. No. He blinked. Excuse me. I gave up my name once. My face. My voice. For 7 years, I was a ghost so others could sleep peacefully. I'm not doing it again. Rayner opened his mouth, but I cut him off. You want to protect the program? Then let me be its spine. Let people see what sacrifice actually looks like. His silence was answer enough. Back at the hangar, I found Lot standing beside the Mark V, polishing her with the same care he gave to old vinyl records. Bad meeting, he asked. They want me gone again. He didn't look surprised, just kept working the rag in small circles. So what are you going to do? I exhaled slowly. Stay. He nodded once. Then he pointed to the jet's nose cone. A new stenciling had been painted beneath the cockpit. Phantom 06, still flying. That night, I sent out a single message through encrypted comms, addressed to all Guardian Initiative participants, current and future. Legends don't exist to inspire fear. They exist to remind us who we are. Some stories survive the shadows. This one's just beginning. The inquiry was inevitable. They called it a closed session, but I knew better. Cameras might have been banned, but the eyes in that room reported to more than just one chain of command. Capitol Hill security had cleared a wing of the Defense Oversight Building. Inside, senators and defense officials sat in a long horseshoe around a simple table where I stood, no rank on my collar, no wings on my chest. Just me, alive, visible, and no longer silent. A thin senator from Maine leaned forward first. Commander Reyes, you were presumed dead for 7 years. Why remain hidden? I met his gaze. Because the mission required it. Because there were threats to this country that couldn't be fought with press releases and medals. And because sometimes, the best service is the one no one ever hears about. Murmurs rippled around the room. A younger representative, clearly gunning for TV time, spoke louder. So you're saying you acted without oversight? That you took lives, disrupted foreign operations, without proper channels? I didn't flinch. I'm saying I completed missions sanctioned at the highest level. Missions that save lives. Missions your own intelligence chairs approved, but never put in writing. That shut him up. Then someone I didn't expect stood from the back of the room. Deputy Director Julian Voss. He walked slowly toward the table, holding a slim black case. Permission to submit supplemental evidence, he said. The chair nodded. Voss opened the case. Inside were flash drives. 6 of them, labeled with operation codes that made a few faces around the room pale. These are declassified reports, he said. Operations carried out by Commander Reyes that stopped a chemical attack in Berlin, dismantled a double-agent ring in Langley, and disrupted a weapons transfer to hostile forces in the Pacific. He turned to the crowd. I authorized everyone. Then he looked at me, and I'd do it again. The room shifted. The storm began to calm. Outside the hearing, a press pool waited. They knew something big had happened behind those doors. The leak hadn't gone away, it had multiplied. News anchors were asking who the ghost pilot was, and why the military had written her off. Rayner pulled me aside. You sure you're ready for this? He asked. I nodded. Time people saw what a real Guardian looks like. The podium was set on the front steps, flanked by flags, floodlights, microphones. I stepped out into a wall of flashing bulbs and roaring questions. For a moment, it felt like standing on a carrier deck in a storm. Overwhelming, unrelenting. But then I saw them. Cadets from the Guardian Initiative, standing shoulder to shoulder on the edge of the crowd. Silent, resolute, watching me. And I remembered who I was. I stepped to the mic and spoke into the noise. My name is Commander Kaelin Reyes. Call sign Phantom 06. And yes, I was declared killed in action 7 years ago. The crowd quieted. But I didn't die. I became what the mission needed. I went into the shadows so others wouldn't have to. I stayed silent so others could speak freely. I paused. There are men and women out there right now, serving in ways you'll never read about. They don't do it for medals or fame. They do it because the mission matters. And because service, real service, demands more than most people can imagine. Cameras clicked like thunder. But they're not ghosts, I said. They're guardians. And they're watching. 3 weeks after the hearing, I returned to Red Rock. The sun was just starting to dip behind the hangars, casting that soft amber light that makes the whole base feel like memory. Familiar, sacred, unfinished. Lot met me at the edge of the runway, holding 2 steaming mugs of terrible coffee. Place got quiet without you, he said, handing one over. I sipped. Still awful. Still perfect. They asked me to speak at the academy next month, I said. About legacy. He chuckled. Funny. You are the legacy. I shook my head. Legacy isn't about one name etched in stone. It's about what that name stands for when you're gone. We walked in silence toward the memorial wall. A new plaque had been added beneath the long list of names. Commander Kaelin Reyes, Phantom 06. Guardian in the shadows. Service beyond recognition. They'd kept my name on the wall, just like I asked. Not because I was lost, but because I had chosen to vanish for a mission that mattered. I placed my hand on the stone. You can rest now, I whispered to the woman I used to be. They know. Inside the hangar, the Mark 5 sat freshly polished, her new decals gleaming under the overhead lights. Eli Johnson stood beside her, reading off a checklist to a fresh-faced cadet who looked both terrified and thrilled. Try not to kill the bird, he muttered to her. She grinned nervously. Yes, sir. I stepped in. She's not yours yet, rookie. Earn her. The cadet snapped to attention. Commander Reyes. At ease, I said. You've still got a lot to learn. That evening, the first full Guardian Initiative class graduated. 25 officers. Each one had faced more in training than most would see in their first years of active duty. We gave them no ribbons. No formal salutes. Just a flight patch, stitched with quiet meaning. A winged silhouette in gray. Guardians never sleep. The next morning, I walked into the Tactical Operations Center and found Lot placing a final piece on the wall. A photo. Me. Eli. Lot. The cadets. Standing in front of the jet. Beneath it, a simple brass tag. Some ghosts come back not to haunt, but to teach. He stepped back and gave a small nod. I think that's the last piece. I looked around the room. Maps. Training modules. Resilience briefings. A legacy built not on fame, but on truth. Not the last, I said. Just the first. That night, I stood alone on the tarmac, wind tugging at my jacket, jet engines rumbling softly from the far runway. I looked up. The sky was clear. No ghosts. Just stars. And for the first time in years, I felt whole. No masks. No aliases. No shadows. Just Kaelin Reyes. Still flying. Still watching. Still guarding. Because some of us weren't born to fade. We were born to fly and never land.